In this video, I'm going to teach you how to tell better stories so that you can do life better. And here's what I mean. Whether you're a CEO who's building a team, or a young person applying for their first job, or a parent who just wants to connect better with your kids, the best tool that you have at your disposal is being able to tell true, connecting, empowering stories. My name is Taylor Hughes. I'm an entertainer, a keynote speaker, and a storytelling coach who helps people get better at telling the stories that made them. Today, I'm going to share with you the 3 simple steps I've used to write stories for my books, for my comedy magic performances on stage, and for keynotes that I've presented hundreds of times. Now, quickly, before we get into that, let me explain what makes a bad story. Because before you sit down to tell a story, you should think, is this a good story to tell? No one wants to be the person at the party that we've all been cornered by who goes, I have a great story for you. And then as they start to tell the story, your eyes glaze over and you look off into the distance and you think of more interesting things like the state of Delaware. Most bad stories are just a list of things that happened followed by other things that happened. I'll give you an example. I went to the store because I needed some mayonnaise, and then they didn't have any mayonnaise, so I got some Miracle Whip. But I thought to myself, I don't like Miracle Whip. So then I went to a different store, and at that store they had a coupon, and it wasn't for mayonnaise, but it was for steaks. And I thought I could use some steaks. At this point, you're thinking, what is this story about? Why are you telling me this? And most importantly, is it ever going to end? Great storytelling draws people in with a hook at the beginning. It promises that we're going somewhere, and I'm going to tell you where we're going. And then at the end, it surprises us with a realization we didn't see coming. This is how every book, movie, or TV show you've ever loved has operated. In storytelling, we call this the major dramatic question, and it's introduced very early on in most movies or TV shows. Will Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks end up together? Will the Goonies find One-Eyed Willie and save the Goondocks? Will the superheroes defeat Thanos and save the planet? All of these are introduced very early on, and they give us a reason to keep listening to the rest of the story or to watch until the end. Now, in a moment, we're going to watch together one of my favorite stories from my comedy magic special, Chasing Wonder, and we're going to break down the structure of that story, but I'm going to give it to you now. These are the 3 steps that I use to write every story and that I think you can use to start telling better stories. The first thing that we need is something to tell a story about. And so what I like to do is I separate my story writing time from my brainstorming what I'm going to write about time. This will keep it so that you never have writer's block. You'll always have something to write about because you thought long ahead of what to write about someday. I'll give you an example. On my phone, I keep a list of moments. These are not actual stories that are thought out and well written. These are just things that I think about. I think about my dad taking me on the road we called the roller coaster road because it was bumpy up and down. I think about my wife and I when we were in high school going dumpster diving. I think about the time that as a little kid I threw a baseball bat up into a tree to knock mistletoe down so that I could sell it to the neighbors. Now these will all become great stories, but right now they're just memories. And so I take a moment to mine for memories. If you sat down right now and set a 10-minute timer, I bet you'd come up with 10 or 15 or 20 memories from your past that are not fully written stories. They're just moments that are interesting. Those make for great stories. Now, there are some stories that just aren't good stories to tell because we know where they're headed. For example, if you said, hey Taylor, let me tell you about the time I almost died. It's not going to be a good story. It might be interesting, but that hook of let me tell you about a time I almost died, well, you're telling me and I know you're not dead, so that doesn't make an interesting story. You want to introduce a dramatic question where we don't know where it's headed, and then hopefully at the end, you're going to surprise us. So the first thing that I want you to do is I want you just to write down what happened. What was the weather like that day? Look for really interesting things. What was the song that was playing on the radio? Tell me things that put me in that moment and that set me up to be interested in what's happening in that situation. I want to be able to relate to it. So you're going to write about a moment that happened in your life. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go back in time and you're going to write, well, what happened before that? Paint the world for me that existed before that. And then afterward, you're going to write what happened following that story, that moment in your life. So this is what life was like before. Then this thing happened. That's the core of your story. And then this new thing existed afterward. I'll give you a great example. Mike Birbiglia, one of my favorite storytellers, he's got a great podcast called Working It Out, and he's got several Netflix specials that are all stories that tell a larger story. So in his show, the new one, the conceit is, I don't want to have kids. Then we find out he and his wife had a kid. And then we find out his opinion on kids totally changed afterward. That's the three-part structure. This is what my life was like. This is what I thought about this thing. This was my opinion on this topic or this person. Then something happened, and now my opinion changed, my thought changed, my life changed. That's a transformative story. So right now, let's take a look at one of my favorite stories from Chasing Wonder, and then we're going to break it down further.
It was my birthday, and my parents had planned a surprise. You see, we grew up in this house, a creaky old house. It was built in 1901 in Azusa, California, the type of house that when you walked through it, you felt like mystery could be around every corner. We had these two large pocket doors, you know, the kind that when they open up, they kind of slide into the wall and just vanish like something you'd read about in a mystery novel. And it was behind those doors that my parents, every single time for our birthday or Christmas, would hide our big surprise. Well, that evening, all my friends from school sat crisscross applesauce facing these two doors. We didn't know what was behind it. And when the doors opened, it was a magician. And he did things I had never seen before. He made things levitate. And he made things, go from here to there. And then he did something that is seared into my memory as one of the greatest magical moments of my life. He took a single sheet of paper and he folded it into a cone, like a funnel. And he bent the end of the paper and he held up the paper. And then he got a gallon of milk and he poured the milk into this new paper funnel he had made till every last bit was there. And a second later, he snapped his fingers, the paper opened, the milk was gone, and I was addicted. So I went to ask him, I'm like, he's gonna tell me how he did that. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Magi. But one thing they're not too keen on is revealing trade secrets to a kid. So instead, I just went to the local library. Did you know that every library in this country has a section that will teach you how to do magic? It's there, and no one looks for it. You could, look, I'll tell you where to go. 793.8, that's the section. Yeah, it's all up like how to juggle cheeseburgers and magic tricks. It's all there, but no one goes. And I went there, and it was there that I found the secret of how he made the milk vanish. Now, there was only one problem. There was only one shop that made this prop. It was a shop called Owen Magic Supreme, and they wanted $75 for this trick that you needed to make milk vanish. Now, as a kid, that might as well have been $1 million. So instead of doing the milk trick, I started getting cardboard boxes and duct tape and making my own props. I did this for 3 years before I booked my real gig. Shannon Carter's 10th birthday party. I was gonna get paid $10 on all the pizza I could eat, and I couldn't sign up quickly enough. The day before the show, I was nervous though. Even though I've been practicing with my tricks I made, I didn't have a closer. I didn't know what was gonna really wow him. So I had my mom take me by the little trick shop in our neighborhood one more time. And even though I had been there dozens of times before, this time was different. Because on the dusty old shelf behind the gentleman who worked there was the secret of making milk vanish. It was used. A guy had retired, sold all his props, and the best part is they only wanted $5. So now I'm up $5 and pizza, and I've got the trick. The next day, I'm so stoked. I practiced at home, everything went great, and then I show up at Shannon's backyard, and they've got it decked out. Over there's a creepy clown, over there's a bounce house, here's the gazebo, that's where the show's happening. And it is happening. It's going good, a little too good. Because I started to feel this welling up of overconfidence. And toward the end of the show, I said, Shannon Carter, I want to invite you to join me on stage for one final illusion. And Shannon came in her blue satin birthday dress, and she sat in a little stool that was right there. And I said, Shannon, I hope you remember this for the rest of your life. And I think she did. Because as I took the paper and I folded it just like I had seen the magician do, and I bent the end, and I brought out the milk, and I held up the paper and I held up the milk. And in a moment of pure madness or genius, I held them both over Shannon's head. And it was at the moment that I began pouring that I realized I didn't set up this trick. See, if you set up the trick, magic happens. And if you don't, milk happens. And it happened. In 1 second, I dumped an entire gallon of milk all over Shannon in her blue birthday dress. Pandemonium set in. People were going crazy. Parents were grabbing towels. My best friend Cody was in the front row. Just chugged a Capri Sun, did the biggest spit take the world's ever seen. And so now I'm covered in juice and she's covered in milk and everyone's screaming and then it gets quiet. You know the quiet. You've experienced it. Everyone looked to see what Shannon was going to do. And it was in that moment that Shannon looked at me, covered in milk, and she gave me one of the best gifts and taught me one of the greatest lessons anyone's ever shared with me. Because she didn't get angry. She laughed. And as silly as it sounds, I think about what would have happened if in that moment she took herself too seriously. She had every right. She could have said whatever she wanted. But in that moment, she made it so that I would actually try to do magic again. So if you have any fun tonight, let's thank Shannon Carter.
So there you go. If you look at that story, having known the structure that I told you earlier, you can now break it down pretty simple. At the beginning of the story, it's all about the trick. I think that's the most important thing. That's my life's mission. That's my goal. That's my purpose, is to learn this trick. Then this moment happens where I screw up the trick. And then afterward, I have a different opinion. I realize, oh, it's not about taking yourself so seriously. I've learned, I've grown, I've transformed, and you're inviting the audience to do the same thing. The reason that I think that's a great story is it's about failure. And I would encourage you, another great tip for storytelling is don't just write about your victories. There's a lot of people who they get online or they get on stage or they become a politician and all they do is talk about their success and their victory and how great they are and how great this is. And I would encourage you, those are not intriguing characters. Intriguing characters are ones we can relate to. I don't want to just hear about your success. I want to hear about how you failed and you still made it through. Because I'll tell you what, we don't always feel as individuals successful. Sometimes we feel like failures. Sometimes we feel discouraged. And it's empowering to hear stories of other people who essentially survived things that we've had to survive. If there's a story that you're thinking of telling and you start to get a little nervous about telling it, that's probably the story you should tell. If you start to write down a story and you feel a little embarrassed or nervous or feel like people are going to think you're crazy, those are some of the stories that we can relate to the best because it helps us feel like we're not alone. So again, 3 steps. Write a moment in your life. Tell me what happened. Paint the picture. Then go back and before that, write what the world existed like beforehand. And then at the end, write what changed, what was different at the end. And now you have an arc of a transformative story that can help you connect with people better. And not only that, you'll understand yourself better. One of the best things you can do for yourself is to write down some of your stories and to think, how did I become this person? How did my life get to where it is? And who are the different people that played the role in my life? You're not the hero of your story. The hero of your story are the people who encouraged and guided you and brought you along. And when you can tell those kind of stories about how other people pass the baton to you, you get to be the person to pass the baton to someone else, and you get to become the guide in their story. I hope that this video helped you. I hope that you found something encouraging in it. Interesting thing is 78% of the people who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you haven't subscribed, I'd encourage you to follow along. It makes a huge difference and it helps other people see it as well. And if you'd like to learn more about my work, you can go over to taylorhughes.com, drop me a line, send me a message. I'd love to stay in touch and hear about what you've got going on.